Welcome to Session 5 of the Anxiety and Depression Reduction Workshop. Last session, we discussed the impact of our automatic thoughts. We also explored how your habits can maintain a depressed or anxious state. Today, we will be exploring alternative responses to our thoughts. Before we begin with our relaxation technique guided imagery for the day, let's measure our levels of distress on our thermometer, remembering that 0 is non-existent and 10 is the most you've ever experienced. When doing a guided imagery, you want to imagine your restful place. It is helpful to have the same restful place every time you do a guided imagery. What you will do is picture the place as vividly as you can. You'll identify everything you see, hear, smell, taste, and feel. Just looking at it in your mind's eye like you would a photograph is not enough. The visualization works best if you incorporate as many sensory details as possible. We will use the example today of being on a dock on a quiet lake. Sit back, close your eyes, or cast your gaze downward. Begin to see the sun setting over the water. See the boats pulled up to the dock. See the waves splashing against the coast. See the trees in the distance. Hear the birds singing. The sound of the leaves rustling on the trees. Hear the distant voices. Hear the engines of the boats shutting off. Smell the pine trees. The smell of a distant burning bonfire. Smell barbecues cooking. Feel the cool water on your bare feet and the feeling of the dock under your hands. Taste the fresh, clean air. Enjoy the feelings of your worries drifting away as you slowly explore your restful place. When you are ready, gently open your eyes and come back to the present. Don't worry if you sometimes zone out or lose track of where you are. This is normal. You may also experience feelings of heaviness in your limbs, muscle twitches, or yawning. Again, these are normal responses. A copy of the script can be found in page 42 of your workbook. Now go ahead again and measure your level of distress on your thermometer, 0 being non-existent and 10 being the most you've ever experienced. Before we begin to identify alternative responses to our automatic thoughts, it can be helpful to explore triggers that cause them. So let's talk about common triggers. Triggers can be external events such as a test or internal stimuli such as lightheadedness or racing heart that can lead to our anxiety and depressive symptoms. Having one symptom can be a trigger for other symptoms. For example, I just said lightheadedness, which is a symptom of anxiety, but lightheadedness can also be a trigger for other symptoms like thought or behavior symptoms. Understanding your triggers is important because it helps you to understand yourself better. Understanding your triggers can help you also when you use your toolbox before it becomes overwhelming. So look at page 43 in your workbook. Notice that there are several domains listed at the top of the page to help prompt you. We are going to look at this worksheet to learn about common triggers and identify some of our own triggers. Keep in mind that your triggers may or may not fit into these categories. Some examples of triggers might include actual events, being invited to a party, physical sensations, racing heartbeat, or thoughts, worrying about the health and safety of others. Take some time to complete this worksheet now, identifying your triggers that you've noticed yourself experiencing. Pause the video to complete this worksheet. We're going to explore some specific ways that we can begin to engage in our cognitive restructuring which is a fancy term for changing our thoughts. A big goal of cognitive restructuring is to slow down and pay attention to our thoughts so that we can more intentionally make choices about what to do next. The good news is that over the last few sessions, you have already begun to do this by looking more meaningfully at your current thoughts and how they perpetuate anxiety and depression. We will introduce several techniques for beginning to approach thoughts more intentionally. Remember that your current thoughts are a pattern. We can use your brain's skill for creating habits that begin to create new thought habits. New habits can take some time and practice, so I encourage you to be gentle with yourself as you try these new techniques. Let's start with discussing self-affirmations. Just as our unhelpful thinking patterns reinforce other anxiety and depressive symptoms, research has shown that drawing attention to our positive qualities can inhibit or stop the downward spiral. Additionally, attending to our positive characteristics makes it easier to change and move towards goals. While anxious or depressed, it's easy to see all the things that we believe are wrong with ourselves, and it can be challenging to identify our positive traits. I'd like for us to take a moment to practice the skill of focusing on our positive qualities. Please take a look at page 44 in your workbook, which will help us start creating self-affirmations. Take a moment to write down one self-affirmation for yourself using these guidelines and following the examples provided. Some tips for self-affirmations include: start your affirmations with I am, keep them short, keep them positive, use feeling words when you can, keep them focused on yourself. If you're feeling stuck, ask yourself questions like, when was the last time you felt proud of yourself and why? Have you ever forgiven someone who has hurt you? Have you ever received a compliment that you agree with? What would your best friend or loved one say about you? Feeling guilty? Consider this. We are socialized to ignore or minimize our positive characteristics. Unfortunately, we then just dwell on our negatives. Practicing self-affirmations can help bring balance and improve our mood. Pause the video right now and to take a few minutes to complete the worksheet on page 44. What was it like for you to think about a self-affirmation? Were you able to create one yourself? If this is a new skill, it may take some time to get really good at it. I encourage you to continue saying an affirmation daily. You can create a new one every day or repeat the same one. Try to say them at a specific time each day, like before bed or upon waking. You may also find that it's not enough to simply write down the affirmation. When we finish writing them down, we can forget about them until we are forced to write a new one. Sometimes we need a place where we can see them in order to be reminded of our affirmations on a regular basis. You might put your affirmations on your desk where you study, next to your toothbrush, or on the lock screen of your phone.
By now, you are all probably experts on the cross-sectional formulation and can probably explain it to your friends. But let's take another look at it before incorporating it into the next component.
You begin the simple cross-sectional formulation by identifying an anxiety or depressive provoking event, then note the interactions of your symptoms. We have found that the cognitive component is heavily weighted such that the way you think about or interpret a situation can perpetuate our depression or anxiety and then trigger other symptoms. We spent the majority of last session talking about the impact of automatic and unhelpful thoughts. You may be asking yourself, so what now? What do I do about it? Remember that we have been doing activities to address the physical symptoms directly through our relaxation strategies, and that by addressing the physical symptoms directly, you are freeing up mental energy to address the other symptoms. Also remember that completing the cross-sectional formulation is a tool. It requires that you slow down in detangling the symptoms that you are feeling. Okay, so now let's focus on how to address the thoughts directly through cognitive restructuring. Remember from earlier in the session that cognitive restructuring involves purposefully slowing down, challenging your automatic and unhelpful thinking patterns, and giving yourself a broader perspective on the situation. This takes time and a lot of practice. Be patient with yourself. So here's how it works. When you start to notice depression or anxiety symptoms, think to yourself, stop, pay attention, and get perspective. This means stop, pay attention to what is going on in your mind and body, and then be intentional about what happens next. What we want to do here is to slow down the process so that you don't get caught up in your symptoms and so that you feel more in control. The ultimate goal is for the stop and pay attention mantra to become second nature so that you use it even before experiencing your symptoms. This is going to take a lot of time and practice. To better understand the stop and pay attention mantra, let's work through an example of alternative responses to our anxiety as well as an example for our depression. I want to highlight that when we are doing the alternative response, we are not saying just think positive, because we have all probably heard that before, and it's not that simple. What we are saying is, let's look at the situation from a broader perspective. For example, using the same anxiety-provoking situation of being invited to a party and feeling anxious about going, one of the alternative responses is, I might still have an okay time. It is important to remember that you're probably not going to jump from the thought, I'm going to have a terrible time, to the thought, I'm going to have a blast. Make sure your alternative thoughts are realistic and believable. Don't try to jump to the positive extreme, as this would be an example of an unhelpful thinking style of black and white thinking. Now let's review the examples on page 45 and 46 of your workbook. First, we will walk through an alternative response worksheet for our anxiety situation. Remember that the situation was that a student invited me to a party in my residence hall. I didn't know her very well, and I felt anxious about going. The first thing we are going to do is look at the alternative thoughts and image column, look at the questions that might help us guide us in identifying alternative thoughts, and identify some alternative thoughts that might be helpful. So using these questions, the person was able to come up with the alternative thoughts of, I may not be as socially awkward as I think. If she invited me, she probably wants me there. And I might still have an okay time even if I'm anxious. We then move to the alternative behaviors column. Using some different prompting questions to help us identify some alternative behaviors, the person can come up with some strategies to help them. So some of the strategies they identified were deep breathing, distracting themselves, seeking support from friends and family, doing a pleasurable activity, or using this alternative response worksheet. When you fill out your own, you can just check these boxes simply on the worksheet, or you can add in your own coping strategies. And for alternative feelings, we have some other guiding questions that can help us, but we're really looking at what are those feelings that we want to feel out of the situation. So this person identified excited, wanted, liked, and hopeful. At the bottom of the page, we want to look at outcomes. The original outcome was, I stayed in my room and watched Netflix. And then we'll look at what outcome this person desired. If they were using these new alternatives, what would be the likely outcome in the future? I want to go to the party so that I can make friends. If I feel too uncomfortable, I can always leave. So now we are going to look through the alternative response worksheet for depression. So the depressive situation that we've identified is I have a group assignment due for my class, and I ask a fellow classmate to be my partner, but she declines. So similar to the anxiety one, we are going to have different questions that can help guide us for our alternative thoughts, our behaviors, and feelings. Some of the alternative thoughts that this person was able to come up with using those guiding questions were, she might already have a partner, I've done well in this class so far, so I might not be stupid, and not everyone is going to like me, and that's okay. Using the guiding questions for behaviors, the person could identify coping strategies such as our relaxation strategies, seeking support, doing some distraction activities like a pleasurable activities, and completing this alternative response worksheet. And then alternative feelings that the person identified are that they want to feel content, calm, and reassured. The last piece of this worksheet, again, is to identify what the original outcome was, as well as the desired outcome. So the original outcome was that the person felt stupid, they didn't join a group, and they waited for the professor to assign them one. And then they didn't work on the project because they were embarrassed about being assigned to a group. The desired outcome that the person wants to have is that I am able to feel reassured and find another group to join, that they complete the project and do well on it. Now it's your turn. Using an anxiety or depressive situation from one of your homework assignments or one that you completed during session, fill out a blank alternative response worksheet, which can be found on page 47 in your workbook. Pages 48 and 49 have questions if you're having trouble identifying alternative thoughts. Please pause the video to complete this worksheet now. In addition to self-affirmations and alternative responses, there are several other little tricks that we can use to begin to shift our patterns of thinking. Let's turn to page 50 in our workbook to review these techniques. As you review them, remember it takes time to build new habits because you are training your mind to think differently. I encourage you to try each of the techniques at least 3 times with intention before deciding if you like them. You might find out that some of these tricks work better than others, or at different times, or in different ways. I'd like you to build ample techniques for shifting your thoughts. So some of these techniques include stopping, which is interrupting a thought as it begins. Use a strong image or a word to interrupt the thought. Strongly state it either internally or out loud. The next, distracting. Redirect your mind to something else internally or externally, preferably something pleasant and engaging. Mind observing. Watch, label, or log your thoughts. Use language such as, I am thinking, or my mind is having a thought that, to distance yourself from the thought. Understanding. Begin to understand where your thoughts come from by asking a number of questions, including, what is the purpose of this thought? Does it tie to a specific schema? Mindfully letting go. Use imagery or words to visualize thoughts passing by. Good examples are clouds in the sky or leaves on a stream. And lastly, gratitude. Try to focus on something that you are grateful for from the past, present, or future. Now let's put everything we have learned into an action plan for managing anxiety or depression. On pages 51 and 52 in your workbook is a worksheet with a number of questions about recognizing symptoms and triggers and implementing some of the coping strategies we have discussed. The purpose of this worksheet is to have a condensed version of this workbook that you can easily refer back to when needed. Go ahead and take a few minutes to complete this worksheet now. Please pause your video. Before we go, let's talk about what we learned in these 5 seminars. We discussed anxiety and depressive symptoms while focusing on the ways in which thoughts, behaviors, feelings, and physical symptoms interact. We've also increased awareness of our triggers and unhelpful thinking styles, identified coping strategies for dealing with these symptoms. Remember that we have to practice these strategies regularly to effectively manage our anxiety and depression. Remember, some amount of anxiety and sadness is normal and part of the human experience. With consistent practice, these coping strategies we've learned in this seminar will help maintain our ability to manage our anxiety and depression and prevent us from feeling overwhelmed by these symptoms. We created a personalized action plan to continue to practice in the future. Make sure you use your plan even when your anxiety and depressive symptoms are low as a maintenance measure. In fact, it can be more helpful to practice when your symptoms are low because practicing when they are low makes the skills become more second nature so that when you do feel anxious or depressed, the skills come to you more easily. It is our hope that with continued practice, these skills will minimize the overwhelming experience of depression and anxiety. Thank you for your participation. Remember that if you are in need of additional support, you can always reach out to CAPS by calling 479-575-5276. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.